All right, thanks for waiting. My name is Tom Levine. I'm Cornerstone's technical specialist and commission specialist. And today we're going to be talking about Excel. In particular, we're going to be talking about becoming a practical Excel user by using the menus. Now, the thing about the menu that is in Excel is there are a lot of them. There's one at the bottom of your screen, one at the top of your screen, a lot of different tabs to it. And the other thing is it's actually not technically called the menu. It's actually called the ribbon. So realistically, when we say you're becoming a practical Excel user with the menu, we're really just talking about how to use the ribbon and how to interact with different file types. So without further ado, let's get to some of the things marketing wanted me to mention. First off, just some general housekeeping. If you have a question at any point during this presentation, I'm happy to answer it. I will hopefully be going through and answering questions as you have them, but if I'm in the middle of an important part of the presentation, I'm going to finish that before I check the questions box. If you would please type your questions in there, then I promise I will get to them. Additionally, one other thing that I mentioned is if you don't feel comfortable putting your questions here, then that's fine as well. You can call me directly at 513-487-5390, or you can actually send me an email. My email is tlevine@crnstone.com, and it's up there on your screen. You don't need to copy this information down right now. I'll have this slide up at the very end of the presentation as well. Also, you have a chance to earn up to $7,000 with Cornerstone's Cash Incentive Program. When you earn more, you sell more. And we have some additional information available on our website at www.cornerstone.com/cash-incentive-program/. You can find that pretty easy online by going to our website and then just looking through our resources page. Also, don't forget about our agency services program. Agency services is designed to help you make a plan for your business, whether that is something like our client referral program or maybe working with us on a service agreement. For more information or learning about how to become an ASP broker, please visit www.crnstone.com/what-we-offer/agency services program. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. I do actually have some sheets attached as well under handouts if you would like to follow along. The first is the one we're working in right now. It's called Excel Sample Workbook. And then the second handout that I've got attached as well is called Sample 2. And specifically, I have that attached to show one thing. You don't necessarily have to download Sample 2 if you don't want to follow along exactly. But I'd recommend having it just when we get into some of the information on some of these other parts of the ribbon. And speaking of, when I say ribbon, what am I talking about? Well, particularly I'm talking about this area right here. I'm going to go ahead and use my spotlight on it, but it's basically this menu up in here and all of the parts beneath it up to this section of Excel where you see the full time entered. And the reason that I'm getting so specific here is that Excel actually has a lot of different moving parts. The first area is the ribbon, which includes the ribbons tabs and all of this information down here. If I click on this little collapse button, or I hit Control F1, then it actually collapses the ribbon and it makes it a little bit easier to just look at data in general. I personally don't prefer this view because I like to always have my menus up, especially this home menu. So if you have a view of Excel where you don't see that ribbon, just click on Home or any other ribbon menu, and then you're going to click on this pin icon. This pin is pinning the ribbon in place. And what it does is it makes sure that no matter what you're clicking on, no matter what you're viewing in Excel, you always have the ribbon available. I get calls from a few different people once in a while that always say, oh, my ribbon disappeared, what can I do? And it's as simple as that, just extending the ribbon, then clicking the pin to get full access to your menu at all times. I think that's pretty useful. In addition, we have a lot of just really useful quick items here in our home menu. The home menu is kind of the default menu of the ribbon, and it's a part of Excel that you're going to be able to just have up at all times. It's the default tab that's open in the ribbon, and it's extremely useful. The reason I say it's extremely useful is because it's kind of like a page for a lot of other parts of Excel. We have font changes, we have different alignment changes for text, we have formats for our numbers, as well as some additional style options, which are also available in separate sections of the ribbon, for instance, under Insert or Page Layout. But here it's just really easy to get quickly into some of the information that you'd use regularly. Let's go ahead and start all the way over here on the left with the clipboard. The clipboard area up in the upper left-hand corner of your screen actually just interacts directly with copying, pasting, cutting information, all of that type of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and select a few policy numbers, types, and date of business for this example. And I'm going to hit the scissor icon. That's similar to just hitting Control X on your keyboard. And what that does is it lets me cut information. If I then click on this cell D17 and then were to go to the Pages option and hit it, it does nothing. And the reason for that is it's just a shortcut for copying. That's one of the reasons that I don't actually interact with this part of it that often. I prefer to just use Control-C and Control-V. That also does copy and paste, like I just did. Control-Z is undo, and I'll be using that quite a bit throughout this presentation. But there are other ways to do that. If you see this little icon up here in the upper left-hand side, it says Redo Paste, and you might not have this option enabled by default, but what that does is it just lets you go forward and back through your actions. Undo Paste is this little reverse arrow, and that will undo your previous action. In addition, there's a little shortcut for saving up here as well. And this area is actually called the toolbar. It's a little bit different than the ribbon because the ribbon is all this stuff down here. But the toolbar is kind of another quick link. It's kind of what I consider to be the customizable access of the home page of the ribbon. And you can manually interact with those arrows there to do that, or you can change it up by clicking on this drop down. This is the customizing of the quick access toolbar. And you can just really quickly add some things in here. You can get into some more advanced customization by hitting more commands, but let's just say I wanted to quickly be able to print something. I'd click on that drop down, make sure quick print is checked, and if I hit this button, it'll automatically print to my first enabled printer. So that's kind of how you'd interact with that section. Other than that, in the clipboard, there's also a format painter. This format painter is just sort of continuously applying the look for a particular highlighted section of Excel. So this relationship area here, I'm going to click on Format Painter and paint it all the way down. And what that did is that extended all of these border cells all the way down because that's the format that I have applied. If I had this highlighted as well and then used Format Painter to paint it down, now it's also filled. So what it does is it not only copies just the border cells, it also copies all of the interior formatting of cells, all of the different bolds, any sort of text formats that you've got. All of that information can be easily and quickly copied using this format painter. So I'm going to undo that real quick, just to get back to our base file type, and then we're going to move into fonts. Fonts kind of display the exact way that text is displayed. What that means is I'm going to highlight column G for this sample. And it means that anything that I could do to change the font, the fill of a cell, any sort of way to change a general look, I could do that from here. I'm going to go ahead and change this to Arial, font size 18 for now. Now, this isn't bolded, but it is font size 18, which is pretty big. That's not normally the size I would choose, but this is how you can very easily just jump through large text sizes. If you don't want to just manually select a font size, or you can even type it into the box here just by doing like 18 again. And you just want to quickly click through font sizes to get a general idea, you can use these two tabs up here, or buttons, I guess. That would be increasing and decreasing font size. So if I click that, I can easily just reduce it back to size 11. Alternatively, I can bold, italicize, and underline my fonts as well from this section. And if I click on the drop-down under underline, I can even double underline all of my text from here. If I want to undo it, I just select the same thing that I had, and that undoes that. Next, you can actually apply full borders to cells from here as well. And what that means is just the black outline around the cell. There is a difference between this gray sort of cell view that you should see and the black cell borders up here. And the difference is that the black cell borders will be visible when you print them. The kind of grayed out ones will not be. It's useful if you're trying to visualize kind of where each cell in the spreadsheet is, which I'll show you later how to turn back on if it ever gets turned off for you. But it's not always preferable to see that. If you're using Excel to outline a document instead of trying to make a full spreadsheet, then oftentimes people actually turn off this view so that they just have a good view of exactly what cells will print and have borders when they're getting ready to finalize a document. You can also fill color with cells by selecting this dropdown. You can select from a wide variety of different colors, and if none of these are to your liking, you can even go into more colors and select colors based off of these hex grids. All I did was I hit the dropdown, selected more colors, and now I can select from all of these different ones. You can also actually fully customize your colors. What you would do is you would enter the red, green, and blue value for a color that you want selected, or you could click on this and refine what color you want selected. This refinement is shown under this new icon here, and this yellow is the current color of the cell. If I wanted to, say, make a teal colored cell, I think this is a pretty good color. This 126, 227, 238 is the color that the cell will format as. If I hit OK, then now I have that color. And if I click on the drop down, you'll see under recent colors, that's also there as well. So it's very easy to customize the color formats of your documents by using something like this. Additionally, if you don't know what color is in a cell, one of the quick little solutions that I have is you can click on a cell, go to the drop-down, hit more colors, and then just hit OK. And what it will do is it'll automatically save that color to your recent colors without you having to edit it or select a color diagram. I'm sure if you've worked in Excel before, there have been times that you've looked at a color and thought, that's none of these available options. How am I supposed to know what that color is? How do I get it all to match the document type? And that's the quick and easy way to do it. I'm going to Control Z through the color formats to remove that as well, just because I like the view. You can also change font colors in cells from this drop-down up here in a very similar way. And as you can see, the recent color that I set through the fill was also available for text. We also have justification and alignment options here. Justification and alignment is useful just for finalizing the view of a workbook. I personally like to get in here if I have some cells that are just kind of extending off into oblivion, other cells that are formatted a little differently, and I just like to make all of my worksheets kind of line up. So what I'll do oftentimes is I'll select a column and then change the way the fonts are formatted so that they're all kind of justified. You can use all of these alignment tools that are very similar to Microsoft Word just by looking through and clicking on them here. This is all for alignment of text. Additionally, however, you can even change text orientation. And what that means is it's the actual slant of the text in the cell. This is extremely useful if you're trying to do some graphic design or if you're trying to apply a layout to a general background. If I click on this orientation, I can select from a few very quick sample ones. For instance, I can angle my cells kind of askew like this. What this does is it actually edits the text of it. And if I just start typing and hit enter, you can see that the text has taken that line. Now I can Control Z to completely undo this, but I'm going to show you the other way to quickly undo it, which is clicking on our drop-down for the text angles, and then hitting Format Cell Alignment. The reason we're going to have to do this is because if you mess with the alignment of the text, it by default doesn't want you to format it back to a straight line. But you can interact with it very easily by using this orientation tool. And I'm just going to circle it real quick for you right here. What that does is it lets you manually control the orientation of what the text is. You just align it the way you want it. Currently it's 0 degrees, as shown by this dial down here. Then I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see, that formatted our selected dependent cell to be formatted horizontally again. I'm going to apply that to the rest of these as well. And all I do is highlight the whole column that I wanted to change, move that little dial, and hit OK. Now then, in addition to that, you can also wrap text, which is a little bit different. What wrap text does is it actually lets you sort of change the way the text is stored in a cell. For instance, let's go ahead and use our carrier column. This is a good example. For all of these carriers, I'm going to select it and then apply wrap text. All I do is I click on wrap text, and now if I click on any cell in that column, you see wrap text is highlighted in green. If I move column Q down, you see that now a lot of that text is hidden. But if I select all of my cells and double click, then you can see the text itself actually wraps around the box. And what it just did is it made the box fill an adequate size to show all of the information in column Q without increasing the column width. Because I told it to increase the actual length of the cell, it just extended the length down as far as it could while maintaining this wrap text option. If I turn off wrap text, you can see those cells snap right back to the way they were. And the reason for that is that I have wrap text turned off. What wrap text really is trying to get at is it's displaying all of the information displayed in a cell, one way or another. If I select column Q again and turn on wrap text, and then manually decrease the size of all these cells again, and double click on column, as you can see, column Q did not actually expand out. And once again, that's because I have wrap text turned on. If I turn off wrap text now and double click on that border with Q, then that automatically lengthened the cell to fill that field. What wrap text really is about is how you want your text to fill your cell. And that's extremely useful if you're looking at a cell and you're trying to figure out why it acts weird when you're messing with the column lengths and with the column widths. Additionally, you have merging and centering options. And what that does is it combines multiple cells into one. It can be a little messy if you're trying to interact with tables directly, but if you're not and you're just trying to get a general look for a cell, for instance, let's go ahead and insert a column up here. You can also do that with these cells options, but I find it a little easier to just right click and interact with it that way. And let's say I wanted to apply like a long title to this section. What I could do is I could select these cells and then hit merge and center. And what that did is it turned all of these cells, cell A1 to G1, into one cell. And that one cell is determined by the upper leftmost box that was a single cell before the merge. So this giant merge cell is now referred to as cell A1. And also by referencing cell E1, B1, C1, any other cell in here, it'll actually change that reference to cell A1 if you're using formulas. That really does matter for if you're using a lot of automated functions in Excel. But if you're just looking at formatting, it's not a big concern. You can undo a cell merge by just clicking on it again. But one word of caution, if you're trying to merge cells with actual data in them, let's go ahead and merge cell F3 to J6. The way I do that is by highlighting the full range and then hitting merge and center. It gives me this warning, and I'm not sure if you can see the pop-up. It says merging cells only keeps the upper left value and discards other values. And I'm going to hit OK to kind of show you what that meant. Now, that policy number that's listed there is the policy number that was listed in cell F3. And if I undo this merge by clicking that merge cell we just created and hitting merge and center, all that data that we had under the merge cell was lost. And that's something that you really want to think about before merging cells and merging the view of cells. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you do accidentally do this though, you can always hit the undo button up here to undo the merge, or you can just do what I do and do Control Z twice, and you can get that data back. Now, in addition to that, we also have formats up here. Formats are actually really useful for viewing the difference between what's entered into a cell and what is displayed in a cell. And the good example for why that's useful is actually twofold. I'm going to go ahead and delete that column that I guess that is the row. But we're going to look at this date of birth. As you can see, there are a lot of different dates that are entered here in this date of birth column. But there are a few that are just listed as strings of numbers, and that's for a reason. These strings of numbers that are listed, for instance, looking at cell H14, we see that this is 40391. Now, 40391 is actually a date, but it doesn't look like one. I'm going to go ahead and highlight column H and format it as a short date. And if we go back to cell H14, there we go. We can see that this string of numbers actually did correspond to 8/1/2010. If I highlight that column again and change things back to general, you can see that cell H14 is back to just looking like a string of numbers. And the reason that it does that is because of the way Excel thinks of dates. Instead of just thinking as a date as a string of text, which it can be entered as, and that's what all of this information is. It's just a string of text. Excel likes to deal with dates dynamically. And what that realistically means to you is that Excel likes to think of these dates as days. It likes to count them manually. I believe the base day 0 is someday back in 1990. I'm just going to go ahead and do this real quick to double check myself. But let's go ahead and do this as a short date. And there we go. It's day 10/1900. Now, Excel actually counts up from this day 0 in order to determine all of the rest of these dates. It's what makes a lot of the date functions of Excel work, but that's not the way you want to display a date, obviously. So the way to get around that is if you have a bunch of dates formatted as numbers, like this, then you just go into this format box and select the date format you want. You can do a short date or a long date. And the difference is that long date by default spells out all of this information. If I wanted to change this back to a short date, that format is automatically month, day, year. But that's not the end of it. And actually, the very useful part about this whole formatting box is that you can pretty much format anything you want by using it. For instance, another good use is if I highlight columns N and O in our sample workbook and change them from number format, which you can tell by just clicking on any of these cells. They're formatted as numbers. And then changing them to general. As you can see, the values actually entered in these boxes are a little bit different than what was displayed. I have this value, this 1.0325, entered in cell 04, but previously, if I look at cell 04, all I saw was 1.03 in the cell box. If I look in the formula bar, however, I can see this is actually 1.0325. And if I'm adding all of this column, it actually sums everything, including those numbers. A lot of carriers will not round off the numbers that they use, but they'll change the way it's displaying the information. If I highlight all of column O, for example, and use these two buttons here, I can increase the amount of decimals that are shown in the individual boxes themselves. So if I, sorry, it's doing that because I had the header highlighted. If I highlight everything in this column except the header, and then I start messing with the number of zeros shown, I can actually just expand this out indefinitely. And the reason for that is because Excel just cares about how accurately you want to display your numbers. I can also undo how many of those zeros are displayed by reversing this. The problem is Excel rounds the number that's displayed. So for instance, if I had 1.0375 instead of 1.0325 in this box, and now I hit enter, now even though the value in the box is under $1.04, it's displaying it as 1.04. And this really just matters if you're trying to add things up, if you're trying to do math in Excel, it can make things a little difficult. So it's just something to have in mind, and it's something about the way that it formats all of these cells. In addition to that, you can also conditionally format cells from your home screen. And what that does is it gives you a general overview of the information in the cells. If I highlight N&O again for this example and go to conditional formatting, you have a few very quick rule options that I'm just going to go through. This is one of the really in-depth parts of Excel, but what this is really used for is just analyzing data at a glance. I can highlight these cell values and use color scales, for example. And what that does is it show me kind of visually what the general range of values are in these cells. The highest being the more green, and the lowest being the more red. As you can see, I have no payment here in cell 07. I have $4.50 here in cell 02. And if I scroll down through, it has even higher values highlighted in green. And so that's a good way to get just a general overview of what's paying you more. You can also apply this to data ranges as well, and dates, and other different sets of conditional formats. So it's a very quick and easy way to just sort of look at your document and know what's higher or lower. You can actually clear this out by clicking on conditional formatting and then hitting clear rules. You can clear rules from the selected cells or from the entire sheet, which is what I'm going to do to undo this conditional format. If you do get interested in this, there are a lot of great resources to really dig into the depths of what conditional formatting can do. But the best thing that you can do is customize these rules. You can choose very specifically how you want cells formatted, but it does involve a little bit of interacting with programming, which is why we're not going to get too in-depth into what this is today. If you are interested, though, please let me know, and maybe we'll do another webinar about it in the future. Additionally, you can format all of these cells as a table by using this style option up here. Formatting things as tables is really useful. And the reason it's useful is for pivot tables and other types of Excel ranges. If I just select this format, it will first tell me what sections I have highlighted. And if I want to change that, I can click on this arrow and just highlight data a little differently. Or I can do what I prefer to do, click on cell A1, hold down the Control and Shift keys, and then hit the over arrow and the down arrow. And what that does is it automatically selects my entire range of data. Then I click on that again, select my table has headers to preserve the header information that I have entered. And then I'm going to hit OK. It says formulas in the header row will be removed and converted to static text, and that's fine. I have some formulas listed up here at the very top. That was a VLOOKUP for all of this information, but it doesn't really matter at this point. So as you can see, I have formatted it as green with a table style, and actually I have this sort of yellow tab that's popped up. What this yellow tab does is it talks in depth about the different tools I can use with this table. And I can summarize it with pivots, which we're actually going to do as our next Tech Tuesday. So I'm not going to get in too deep with it, but it's just a really simple and uncomplicated way to analyze data. I can remove duplicate sets of information, which means I can just select what sort of information is considered a duplicate from this menu. Anything checked is what it's going to look at for duplicate information. So if I unselect all of this and select, let's say, last name, what it'll do is it'll consolidate all of the information based off of the last name. It will not sum all of the values that I have in columns N and O, and that's why I don't recommend removing duplicates for this kind of a table. But it can be really useful if you're just trying to look at a list of names and make sure you don't have multiples of the same one, or maybe multiple policy numbers. It's very useful for cutting down your data. Once you have a set of data selected, you can hit OK. As you can see, it has summarized all of this data based entirely on the last names that I had selected. I'm going to hit Control Z, and that will undo all of the data that it just deleted. In addition, though, you can convert to range, which converts a table into a normal range of cells. So this is how you'd undo your table. What I would do is I would select the upper right-hand corner of my table, select the full range, and just hit Convert to Range. And what that does is it undoes all of the table parts of what I had set up. All of the data is no longer linked, but the formatting is still applied. I'm just going to change this format back to no fill. The text color is all to black. And as you can see, it's dealing with that all as a typical range of cells now. If I undo all that I did and get it back to a table tool, though, I select a piece of the table, you can see that table's back and it's fully popped up. In addition, you can export data formatted as a table to a different, SharePoint file or Visio diagram. It's really useful for interacting with databases. You can do all of this just from the Design tab that pops up by formatting a set of cells as a table. The other useful thing about formatting stuff as a table is that if you wanted to add selections or entries to a set of data, and you're working with pivot tables, you can just start typing beneath the cell and it'll automatically expand the table range. Let's just enter 601 here and hit enter. Now I have all of this area that's just been automatically added to the table by just continuing to type. So it's a way of preserving formatting and by lumping data that's all right next to each other as well. Now I'm going to undo all of this table just with Control Z, and I'm going to get it back to a blank data set. Before I talk more about cell styles and other cell interactions that are available up here. Now, cell styles are just a way to color data and make important information stand out on a worksheet. If I highlight Arrange for the header and hit Cell Styles, and let's say I want to apply a 60% accent, it just automatically and quickly formats the top of the cell so it all looks the same. That's really all that's used for. In addition, if you don't like right-clicking to insert information and mess with cells, you can actually mess with it from the menu up here. You can insert and delete cells and columns and rows just by clicking on these options. And what it'll do is it'll do all of this based on the cell you have selected. Let's say I insert a sheet row and I had column or cell L selected. It has now inserted a sheet row that was above the cell that I had selected, and it pushed what I had selected down one row. If I wanted to delete that from the menu, I could go to Delete, have that row selected, and hit Delete Sheet Rows. And that's how that would be done. You can also highlight multiple ranges of these rows and interact with it that way as well. This Format button here is a way of manually selecting and editing the row's height, width, column information, all of that information manually. And you also have shortcuts to sheet protection, which we're going to get into in a moment, in a little bit later part of the presentation. And you also have access to editing information from the Home tab as well. You can select an entire header, for example, and apply a sort or a filter. Let's go ahead and apply a filter first. What I did was I just selected our top row and hit filter. And now if I click on the drop downs, I can easily sort out, let's say, all female employees. And now I have a list of all the females on the census. Or I could do the same thing for men. And now I have males. This is pretty useful for just looking through your data. But the one thing I would mention about these is that see how all of these rows are now blue for me? That's because there's data hidden in between them. And it'll do this for any part of the row. I'm going to undo my filter now. And the most powerful part, in my opinion, of the entire home screen is this Find and Select option. If I go to Find and Select and I find formulas, for example, as you can see, it found all of those formulas that I mentioned before up here in the upper right. But what that's useful for is telling me what parts of a table are formulas and what parts aren't. If I were to highlight the full set, Find Select, and go to, let's say, comments, I know now that there are absolutely no comments on this sheet. And what I also find useful is this Go to Special section of this dropdown. If I hit Go to Special and select blanks and hit OK, now every single blank cell that I have selected is chosen throughout the entirety of the worksheet that I had selected. Because I had everything in this worksheet selected, every blank cell is now part of this gray highlight. If I just right click and hit delete and hit shift cells left, all of those blanks are now removed. I've consolidated all of my workbook. And that's extremely useful if you're just trying to remove a bunch of blank cells at once, or if you're trying to change the formatting of a bunch of blank cells at once as well. So that being said, we also have a few other tabs up here. Now, this is the default view of the ribbon tabs, and there's a lot of information in here. But we're going to kind of summarize it and talk about the most useful parts. First is the Insert tab. And what the Insert tab is used for is inserting pretty much anything into your table that is not considered just general raw data that you would type in using the formula bar. For instance, I can add a pivot table to my worksheet here. I can view recommended pivot tables and ways to display my data as well from this tables section. And I can also manually format everything as a table like we did earlier from this Insert section here. I just click on the table, and we get that same data selection screen. And now it has all of the tables selected. If I hit OK, now I have that same exact table that I just had selected earlier, completely applied. So the home screen has a lot of information that was already available from this tab as well. If I want to insert pictures or other documents or different things into my table as well, I can do that from this tab here. I just click on Pictures. I go to my desktop presentation folder, find a picture file, and hit Insert. And I can just insert any picture in my file system into this. And I can drag and drop it around and treat it like any other object. I can edit it using this soft part that pops up in the ribbon as well. I can change backgrounds to gray or pretty much anything. I mark all areas to remove. And let's just make a circle here and discard all changes. It's not really something you can see from this particular image, but you can add text to this, change things that are displayed if someone would want to type into here or look at different parts of this picture. You can even right-click and format pictures as well, and these soft menus will pop up. I'm going to go ahead and remove this picture, however, because it's not really that useful to what we're trying to do. I can also search for online pictures, which kind of pulls from a lot of pictures that are publicly available on Bing. Any picture you find here, you'd pretty much be able to use easily without copyright concerns. For instance, if I click on cats, I get a bunch of, open resource uses of cats, and I could use any of these pictures in pretty much any of my advertising. In addition, I can add in different shapes into here. If I wanted to, like, let's say, add a star, I could just go ahead and add that shape. It's really useful for adding in macros if you get into that part of Excel, but it's really more of an advanced use case. Or if you want to, let's say, outline a group of images or like a flow chart, you can add images, hit edit text, and then just type "this is the start." And now you have a star with an image on it that says this is the start. You can sort of use all of these different tools to sort of outline and make a flowchart if you wanted, just by inserting all of these different shapes, formatting them, playing with their orientation a bit, and just moving them around. You can also add icons, which are used to visually indicate different symbols, and you can even insert custom 3D models as well using the illustrations tools. You can also manage add-ins from here, and add-ins are different modifications to Excel that you can download online. We don't use any here personally, but they can make Excel very easy if you don't understand how to use the menu or how to interact with formulas. They're just little cheat ways around things. So you can find those online wherever you'd like, and this is the area that you would go to actually add those into worksheets. You can also insert charts, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to format all of this data into a chart. I did that by highlighting all of the information, and then let's just insert a bar chart, for example. We're going to do a 2D column, and we're not going to get too deep into how to edit this, how to make it make a ton of sense, or how to actually do the formatting of this. That's something we're going to get into in our next video, but that is where you would go to insert chart information. As you can see, this one's a little unintelligible, but that's more because I have a lot of data selected and it wasn't selected in a proper format. You can interact with chart tools as well from the soft menu that pops up. But if you want to remove a chart, I just Control Z out of it, or you would select it, hit delete, and that would remove everything. You can also insert pivot charts from here as well, which are add-ons to pivot tables that make data a little easier to mess with. One of the things that I like to use, though, is I like to insert text boxes. And what I do is I go to the Insert tab, click on Text, and then hit Text Box. And what I can then do is I can just select an area, and now I have a box that I can just enter text into. It doesn't affect the way my data is laid out. It doesn't affect anything else really. It's just an area of the table that I can type data into. I can say this is a census. And now I have a box that says this is a census. I can control the size of it just by clicking on these little dots and moving it around, same way I'd treat a picture. Or if I wanted to move the entire object, I would move my cursor over it. Normally I choose the top part of this box until I get this icon that has arrows pointed in all directions. Then I can click on it and drag it. And I can actually only drag it as far as I can push. You might have to keep moving your cursor back and forth to get it to push a little further. But then I can just drop it here at the end. And if you wanted to look around, you can, move that box the same way. We do have a question that's actually kind of relevant right now from Mike, which is how do you move around insert pictures? So that's kind of what we just covered. You would go to the Insert tab, hit Pictures, and then you would find a picture you want to insert. I'm going to use this sample picture that I have, but you could do this with any sort of image. And then I'm going to hit Insert. Now that I have this, if I move my cursor over the image, I get the same sort of movement box that I was getting with the text box. And I just click and drag, and I can move it anywhere around my sheet. If I want to move it further over into a part of the table that's not displayed, I just bump it up against the corner and kind of hold it there. Same thing for going down. As you can see, I'm moving it down in my rows as well here. And then to remove it, I just select the image and I hit delete on my keyboard. I hope that answers your question, Mike. If I wasn't clear, please let me know. In addition to that, though, you can also insert word art. So if you're trying to add a little bit of flair to the top of your table, or before you insert a print of something, you can access word art from here. You can even insert signature lines, so you could fully outline a contract in Excel, then add a signature line into your document, and you can just have digital signatures to authenticate it. I wouldn't recommend inserting this unless you fully lock down your document as well. And you can even insert objects. Objects are pretty much any kind of file. And what that means is you can actually embed links to PDFs into your Excel documents. If I click on Object here, I could add an Adobe PDF document. I'm going to insert a new document because I didn't have one created. And it's going to load up and ask where I want this document saved to. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'm going to call it Sample. And it actually won't let me create it from the screen. My apologies. But what it does is it actually embeds a file. So if you had a file that you could use to reference for this, then it would embed it that way. That's the way that I typically like to input my links and input other sort of documents. To get more into an idea of it, I can actually create a PDF, and we'll get back into this at the end of the presentation. But it's pretty easy to do. You can even type notations for equations by clicking on the Insert Equation box as well. And the way I did that is I just had a box selected from Insert, and I hit Equation up here in symbols. You can also change the page layouts and get them ready for printing by going into the Page Layout section. You can apply themes to the entire page, which just kind of applies the styles that we were talking about under the home screen. For instance, if I apply organic, that makes the entire sheet look as though it is in the organic format. But that's just a theme that Excel automatically applied. I can change all the color themes here just by clicking on them real quick. You can't see these themes applied very well because I don't have all of this formatted as a table. But if I were to do that really quick, it's going to load through. Then I go to the page layout section and I change the colors to, let's say, Office. It automatically applies that formatting to the full table that I had. I could even change the theme to Berlin. And now everything in the table is applied to the Berlin format. I can change the fonts very quickly as well under page layout, and even text effects. These aren't something that you would normally see, but it's useful for editing the effect of a pivot table or other different types of tables. You can also change your print margins here. What that does is it tells you how you want your table to be printed out. I want it, let's say, printed in wide margins. You can change the orientation of the page printout to landscape. And I'm not sure if you're able to fully see it unless you're following along, but it adds these sort of lines to your worksheet. They're kind of dotted grayed outlines. And if I minimize these columns, that grayed out line follows it. If I extend this out, it's set up so all of these rows that were previously selected are going to be within that print range no matter what. If I want to print individual tiles, I can select Arrange and hit Print Tiles. And now it'll print the selected area that I had, A1 to G20. I did that by clicking on the print area and selecting it. Then I could just hit Print or Print Preview, and it'll show me what it's printing. And we actually had another question here from Jules, which was, if you had time, can you review how to remove blank cells again? I will at the end, I promise. But it's pretty useful. So it's one of the things that I really enjoy. All of these webinars are recorded as well, and we'll get into where to view those at the very end. that print is really just how you would change the print layout. You would interact with it here. You can even apply a background, and what that background does is it applies things like watermarks. It'll load a bunch of pictures here, and I'm gonna work offline and just apply this to the background. What it did is now you see this image that I've been working with as the tiled background of this worksheet. And if I went to print this sheet now, it would print with that background applied. It's how people apply that confidential format to things. If you just have the word confidential tilted and saved as an image, you can apply that to the full document very easily by using the background. And if you don't like it after you add it, you can hit delete background from there. I'm going to undo all of the theme as well on this, just by doing Control Z through all the formatting we applied. And I'm also going to undo the table by continuing to do Control Z as well. This is just before we get into the next section, which is formulas. And the reason I want to do that is mostly because I don't like the way that tables work with applied formatting. The formulas tab we kind of talked about a little bit in our last presentation as well, but what this does is it gives you a very quick way to kind of interact with tables. We talked a little bit about formula and general syntax in our last presentation, and I don't want to get too bogged down in it because it's already 10:23 and we have a little bit more to follow up on. But it's really useful to just sort of add a bunch of functionality to your worksheet. Let's say that I wanted to sum up this set of data. I could do that by going into the Formulas tab and hitting the AutoSum function. Then I just drag this blue box around to set the sum area. And let's say I wanted to sum all of column O in this cell. I just select column O after hitting the AutoSum, and now I have a sum of all of that row. There are a bunch of different functions in here that you can select, and it gets really in-depth. You can also edit things with the name manager here. That can change the name of your table for quick references, which we'll get into in the next presentation as well. You can also use formula auditing here if you have a bunch of circular references, but if you're not very familiar with formulas, I wouldn't recommend getting into it unless you really know what you're doing. Then we also have this data section here. And data is, in my opinion, one of the most useful tabs in all of Excel. What it does is it allows you to very quickly interact with a large set of data. And all of this stuff here you can use to interact with online tables and with data banks. If you have a SQL server hooked up to Excel or an Access server, this is the area that you would use to interact with that. But a lot of people don't have that set up at home. You can also use queries with that database here as well from the Data tab. You also have access to the sort function as well. For instance, let's try doing a sort by age or zip code here. We have zip code applied to this document, so I'm going to apply a sort by zip code. The way I do that is by just hitting the sort option here, and that brings up the sort menu. I'm going to sort by zip code, and I have EEZIP selected right here. I did that by clicking on the dropdown and then by clicking on zip. And now it'll sort my zip codes from smallest to largest. If I hit OK, now we have all of our zip codes sorted. Unfortunately, a lot of these are 43081. And if I jump to the end of the table, I also have 43081 applied to basically all of these. Now that's just for random data selection, but let's say I change this up a bit. I'm just gonna add a bunch of random numbers into this sort. Doesn't have to really be anything. If I highlight that text again and go back into the sort button here and apply the same sort, I don't even have to change the type, and hit OK. Now it's sorted all of this information from lowest to highest by zip code. If I wanted to throw in another type of sort to that as well, I can do that very easily from this sort function. What I would do is I would highlight all of it And now we're going to add another sort by date of birth. If I go to sort, I already have zip code sorted smallest to largest. Can flip that around by just clicking on the drop down there. I'm going to hit add level. And what that does is it tells you how it's going to sort. First, it's going to sort by the zip code. And after that, it says then by and has this selection. What that means is I'm going to hit then by date of birth and hit OK. It's going to sort anything that looks like a number as a number. And now it's sorted everything by zip code, but also by date of birth. As you can see, all of these date of births are outlined from the earliest date of birth to the latest date of birth, along with this zip code sort that we had just applied. And that's how you would kind of tier your sorts and filters. Please let me know if you'd like an additional example of that, and I'd be happy to provide one in a moment. Just sorting through questions here, and then we will move on to a few of these other data tools because these are incredibly useful. These data tools are things like combining columns or separating columns, and they're extremely useful for interacting with cells and tables. We covered this a little bit in our last presentation as well. What text to columns does is it splits a set of cells into additional cells, purely based on what's in the cell. I'm going to add a few spaces here between H and L. And what I'm going to do is highlight column H and then hit text to column. I have a few different options here. I can change it based on a fixed width, or I can change it based on a delimited width. And I'm going to do delimited for this example. If you'd like a more in-depth version of how to do this, I did so in my last webinar as well, and those are all available online. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to check Other, and I'm going to choose a character to sort and filter these things. By that, I mean I'm going to choose a character that it's going to separate it on. These dates are all separated by a slash, so I'm going to input that slash. And now you can see we have a bunch of different lines on this data preview. If I hit Next, I get into kind of a formatted box showing me how it's going to split these, and then I can hit Finish. It'll warn you if there's data there. In this case, all of it's blank, but it's still going to warn me because of the format that's applied to these headers that it's going to overwrite. And then I hit OK. Now, because this was formatted as dates, all of the cells split and formatted as dates as well. But if I highlight them, go back to Home, and change it to a general format, now you can see we have our month, day, and year all split up separately. And we could apply a bunch of different sorts based on how these have split up. I'm going to undo this real quick. And it actually closed out of my sheet. And the reason it did that is probably because I overdid the undos. I can open it again very quickly, and we're going to just get back into that base sample file. Go to Presentation and reopen my sample workbook. And now I have it back open. If we go back into the Data tab, there are a few other things that I'd like to cover here. First is data validation, and you can use this to sort of create your own forms. You can go to data validation, select list, and just enter a list. For example, mom, comma, dad, comma, son, and hit OK. If I click on the drop down here, I now have mom, dad, and son, and it'll automatically fill that information out. If I hit delete, it'll clear out the cell. But then let's say I tried to type something I didn't put in. Anything will do. If I hit enter, it tells me that doesn't apply. And that's because it didn't match the validation that I just applied. So that's how you can force people to enter specific things into specific cells. However, they can remove it by just highlighting the cell that you have selected and hitting clear validation. The other thing you can do is you can very quickly remove duplicates from a worksheet. Sort of what we did with that table earlier. You can select the different cells that you want to remove duplicates from. Because this box is checked here that says my data has headers, it doesn't have that header box selected, and it's named all of these based on those. For instance, let's unselect everything and just remove all of the data based on first and last name. And then I'm going to hit OK. It removes all the duplicate first and last names selected, and it shows me that I actually only had 45 different combinations of first and last names. For instance, Cami Pitcock, Rodney, Brittany Kalin, all of those pieces of information were very quickly removed from my data set just by using this remove duplicates option. I'm going to hit Control-Z because of what I'm actually about to show you next, and it's pretty cool in my opinion. I'm going to undo this conditional formatting as well, just by clearing the validation. And deleting the relationship. Now, before I get into this what if analysis, I'm going to manually input a formula. You can do this a bunch of different ways. For instance, from the formula bar, we can go to insert lookup and reference, and we can do a bunch of different functions. But for now, I think it's probably useful to use the concatenate function. And the way I'm going to do that is by clicking on the cell and then hitting insert function. In the search bar, we're going to type concatenate and hit go. And it'll bring up the concatenate function right up here. And I'm going to hit OK. What this does is it tells Excel that we're combining text. And I'm going to combine our last name, a comma and space, and then a first name. And the way I did that was by clicking on these boxes. I clicked on this box for text 1, and then clicked on cell B2. Then in the second box here, I clicked on it and then hit comma and space on my keyboard. And then for text 3, I clicked on cell C2. And then I hit OK. What that did is actually input all of this information from last name to first name. And if I double click, it extends that formula all the way down. Then I'm going to copy this and insert values here. Now, the reason I walked you through all that is partly to show you how you can interact with the formula sheet, but also because it's going to be useful for what I'm about to do with this data tab. This what if analysis tab, or actually what I'm really looking for is this consolidate function, is extremely useful for consolidating a bunch of different tables. And what I'm going to show you here is exactly why that's useful. If I look through this table, I have this med, dent, viz, life, LTD, STD, all of this information here. And that's not filled in. Now let's open up our second sample workbook that I had as well. This is called sample 2, if you didn't download it. If I open up this table, as you can see, I have lines, I have last names, I have first names, I have that concatenated column that we just created, and I have a bunch of this information here filled out under the medical, dental, and vision. This could be anything. This could be a string of numbers. It could be a string of data. The important thing is that the headers match all of this information. And by that, I mean all of this matches and all of this matches. Let's say we wanted to consolidate all of what we have into one workbook or into one table. The very quick way to do that is from the Data tab. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to input a new worksheet into our sample 2. I'm going to name it sample. And then I'm going to click on cell A1. Then from our Data tab, I'm going to click on this Consolidate button. Now that opens up a menu. It also has a function here. I'm going to just use the base sum function, but you can use pretty much any one here. Counting, averaging, finding the maximum value, finding the minimum value, all of that information is listed. I'm going to use sum, and then we go to this reference box. what this does is it asks us to set what amounts of data we're using. You can use this to consolidate data across multiple tables, across multiple workbooks. It consolidates pretty much everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Browse. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to hit Reference, and then I'm going to hit the up arrow. My apologies. Then I'm going to go to my Excel sample workbook right here. And I'm going to consolidate from that first last column all the way over through critical illness and all the way down through to the bottom of the table, cell 45. I'm going to keep it going as well and just select, well, let's just leave it at 45. Then I'm going to click on that option again, and I'm going to hit the Add button down here. What that did is it just set that I wanted all of that data that I have selected added to this new table we're creating. Then I'm going to click on that up arrow again and go back to sample 2. From sample 2, it's actually probably easier if I just do it this way. For some reason, it's not wanting me to do that. I'm going to go ahead and close out. It's probably a little bit easier if we were working on it with 2 different screens. The easiest way to make sure that you're doing this right, at least in my opinion, is to have them kind of laid out separately. And then we're going to try consolidating again. We're going to do exactly what I had before. Now, as you can see, this reference that we've already created stays, but I don't like that. I'm going to delete it. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the reference and start with the workbook that I already have here. I'm going to start on that first last column and highlight all of the data that we've got. Unclick on it and hit Add. Then I'm going to go back to this cell. Click up and then format and select all of the range from our working cell that we just did. And hit Add again. And finally, I'm going to hit OK. Now, this on its own doesn't look like much. And the reason it doesn't is because I had a few things unselected. But all of this data is the consolidated amount of data from sheet 1 and from this sample box. If I go back into the sample, delete it all. And I'm going to do this one more time. I already have all the cell references I want. But this time, I'm going to hit the Use Labels and create links to data source options. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see it a little bit better. What this did in sample 2, if you click on the 2 option here, is it consolidated all of that data that I had selected based on the relationships. First, it has the name, the concatenated name that I was using. Then it has the workbook that it came from. And it has the additional information from that next workbook. And I have all of that laid out here in one group of cells. If I wanted to then say select it and remove all of the blanks, I could go back to my home screen, find and select, go to Special, and click on Blanks. If I hit OK, it selected all of these blanks, and I can just hit Delete, Shift cells up, and I've deleted all of the blank data in that cell. Now, I know this is kind of an abstract view of everything, and it doesn't really show all of what that actually did to this set of data. But the reason you would do this is if you're trying to consolidate a bunch of different tables that are across a bunch of different workbooks. It's incredibly useful. Then you also have what-if analysis, which is really more useful if you're trying to get at how do things could change over time. It's useful for accounting formulas, but not much else. And you can also, as you can see, change groups. What that is kind of an artifact of what this consolidate function actually did. It formats everything in Excel as a set of groups. By just hitting the Ungroup button, and I'm ungrouping my rows, it ungroups all of that data. It's one of those things that is useful if you're trying to get an overview of your data, but not really if you're trying to just interact with the raw data itself. And then you can also regroup data like rows by just hitting on the group option there as well. And finally, the last thing we're going to cover about this is review and a little bit of the view tab. The view tab, all I'd say that's useful really is this freeze panes option. I can freeze the top row. And as you can see, I can just sort of scroll through my data while keeping that top row visible. I'm going to hit and unfreeze panes again here now. The review tab is actually useful for a few different things. First, for adding comments, which we covered a little bit in our last presentation, but also for protecting worksheets, which I promised we were going to cover here. There are two different ways you can protect things. You can protect worksheets, or you can protect workbooks. You can also select different ranges of cells to select, but that gets a little bit more advanced, and it's not something I get into unless you're going to really interact with this feature. What I'm going to do is I'm going to protect specifically, and I'm going to close out of our sample workbook. I'm going to protect this working file here that we have in our Excel sample. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select this working file, go to Review, and I'm going to select Protect Sheet. It gives you all of these different options for things that users would be allowed to do after the protection. Anything you select here is going to be something people are going to be able to do after you apply this protection to your worksheet. Let's say we want people to select cells, but we don't want people to be able to create pivot tables off of it, edit objects, change scenarios, apply sorts and filters, or do anything else. Then I'm going to apply a password. I'm just going to type all lowercase password into this. I make sure this is selected, and then I hit OK. It'll ask me to re-enter the password. And the reason for that is, if you forget what this password is, now you'll never be able to edit this workbook. For instance, I'm going to select this range of data now that we've applied this protection, and I'm going to hit delete. It'll tell me a seller chart that I'm trying to change is on a protected sheet, and I have to unprotect it before I can edit it. However, I can go to this different tab, this reference file, and still interact with this the same other way that I normally would. That's useful if you want to protect the final set of data or maybe the base data for an entire workbook, but you don't want people to, you want people to be able to interact with a pivot table maybe. That's what this would be used for. Alternatively, if you don't want anyone getting into a workbook without entering a password, you can protect the entire workbook. I'm going to use the same one, and I'm going to hit OK. It'll tell me to re-enter it, and hit OK as well. And now I have to enter a password to be even able to enter this workbook. I'm going to close out of it and save changes to apply that formatting that I just did. Now when I double click to reopen the workbook, it reopened for me. And that's specifically because of the way review applies. This protect workbook applied the protection to the entire workbook, or did it? As you can see, the workbook's protected, but all it really did was protect the structure of it. I'm going to re-enter password as my password. What that did is it just undid the no protection that we just applied. What I wanted to get at is the difference between this protect workbook menu and what actually protecting things does. For instance, protecting this sheet made me unable to enter this workbook sheet. I'm going to unprotect it now. Sorry, I'm bad at entering these passwords. If I really wanted to protect this worksheet from people trying to get into it, I have to go to File, Protect Workbook, and encrypt with password. I can then type in my password. It'll ask me to re-enter it. And then I hit OK. If I hit X and save it now, and try to reopen it, it'll open Excel, but now I have to enter that password. A lot of people think that by hitting the Protect Workbook button alone, that'll protect their entire workbook, and they'll do it from that menu. And it's kind of misleading. What it does is it protects the structure and layout of your workbook for the rows and columns and sheets that you had selected. It doesn't actually do what we just did. I hit OK, and now I can edit this however I'd wish. What I'm really trying to get at with this review section here is you can protect sheets, you can protect ranges specifically. You can even apply tracking changes from here. But if you want to protect your actual workbook itself, you're going to need to go into File and Password Protect it. You can undo that by unencrypting the document. You just have to re-enter the password and hit OK. And undoing the encryption. And now we have it. Alternatively, that pretty much kind of covers all that I was trying to cover. Jules, I hope that answered your question significantly, and I hope you learned something about the menu in Excel. There's a lot of features to this and a lot of different stuff, so it's hard to really summarize it all in about an hour. But I hope you found something that you might find useful in your everyday use of Excel. If you have any additional questions or comments or concerns about how to interact with Excel and you don't want to ask me right now, we did run a bit over, then feel free to reach out to me. My phone number is 513-487-5390, and my email is tlevine@sierraandstone.com. I'd only ask that you input the use case, or just say Tech Tuesday somewhere in the header that you're sending, and I hope that you found some of this useful. We can answer any other questions you might have at this time. I do have about 10 more minutes that I could spare if you have any other questions. And I hope you found something in that at least a little bit useful. Also, a recording of this webinar will actually be uploaded. I'm going to show you where that'll be right now. If you go online to www.crnstone.com, it'll load up our webpage. And then under Resource Center, Webinar Series, you can pull up basically any webinar that we've recorded in about the past year. We only show a few of our most recent ones here, but we also are available on YouTube. If I go into the Resource Center and hit Tech Tuesday, for example, you could even watch the last Excel webinar that I did just by clicking on this Getting Started with Excel. And it links you directly to the YouTube page where it pulls up the video. That one was also pretty lengthy, and we covered quite a bit. So there's a lot to learn, like I said. But Excel is one of the most amazing tools that you can use for your business. It's something people have to interact with every day, and I just hope you learned something. Thank you.